Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The Harry Potter universe has long become a second home of millions of fans around the world. We know it almost by heart, quote the characters, argue about details, and return to the books and films time and again. But that's exactly where the trap lies. When a story becomes this popular, it begins to be picked apart piece by piece. And that's when the cracks in the plot, logical inconsistencies and forgotten rules start to show. Today, I invite you to take a look at the moments when the internal logic of the wizarding world broke down, sometimes noticeably, sometimes subtly. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Why aren't unforgivable curses tracked? In the final part of the saga, the Death Eaters use a clever trick. They place a tracking curse on Voldemort's name, allowing them to instantly find anyone who dares say it. Brilliant, right? But here's a valid question. Why couldn't the same system be applied to unforgivable curses? Their wording is strict and unchanging. They can't be rephrased or masked. Yet the books show multiple times that such spells can be used without any consequences or tracking. Convenient? Absolutely logical, not really. Number 2. Ignoring Dumbledore's portrait. After Dumbledore's death, Harry mourns the fact that he can never speak with his mentor again. And it's touching, if not for one small detail. Dumbledore's portrait hangs in the headmaster's office. It speaks, gives advice, remembers events. It's basically still Albus, just in oil and canvas. We even see him communicating with Snape after death. And yet no one, not Harry, not any of the others, ever turns to the portrait for guidance. Not about Horcruxes, not about Dumbledore's dark past, not about his will. As if the portrait is just set dressing. Number 3. Love potions, mind control with a sweet label. The Imperious Curse is banned. Controlling someone's will is a serious crime. But love potions, which do exactly the same thing, perfectly legal, sold openly. Even in the Weasley twins' joke shop, they can be mailed straight to Hogwarts, a school full of emotional, hormonal, and insecure teenagers. Voldemort's own backstory shows how his mother used a love potion on his father. Once the magic wore off, he left her. That should have been a moral warning, but instead, love potions remain on shelves, like nothing ever happened. Number 4. How did a second-year student end up in Hogsmeade? In Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry can't go to Hogsmeade without a guardian's permission, so he sneaks in using tricks and secret passages. But in Order of the Phoenix, we suddenly see Dennis Creevey, a second year, attending the Dumbledore's army meeting in Hogsmeade. He's 12. He's not allowed to go there yet. He doesn't have an invisibility cloak, no access to secret tunnels. How did he get there? The authors just forgot. Number 5. The confusing logic of wand loyalty. In Deathly Hallows, the concept of wand loyalty is revealed. If you defeat a wand's master, the wand changes allegiance. And you don't even have to kill them. Just disarming them is enough. But what about the hundreds of Expelliarmus spells cast throughout the series? Neville, for instance, disarms Harry in Book 5. Does that mean Harry's wand should now obey Neville? Of course not, but if we're sticking to the rules as they're stated, it should have. Which kind of ruins all the drama surrounding the Elder Wand. Number 6. Percy deducts points, but he's not supposed to? In Chamber of Secrets, Percy punishes Ron by deducting 5 points from Gryffindor. It seems perfectly official. But in Order of the Phoenix, Ron, now a prefect himself, is surprised to learn he isn't allowed to take points. Malfoy even says that only members of the Inquisitorial Squad can do that, not regular prefects. So who's right? Was Percy breaking the rules, or is Hogwarts itself a little confused about its own policies? Number 7. Who was really the master of the Elder Wand? Voldemort kills Snape, believing that he is the true master, of the Elder Wand, but as we know, it was actually Draco who won its allegiance by disarming Dumbledore. Let's assume Voldemort didn't know that. But he didn't even defeat Snape himself. He had Nagini kill him. If the wand chooses its master based on who bested the previous owner, then shouldn't it have chosen Nagini? But that's not the case, because she's a snake, even if she has a dark past. All of this only shows how unstable the concept of wand loyalty really is in the narrative. Number 8. Divination. How do you teach a natural-born gift? Even great minds like Dumbledore and McGonagall are skeptical about divination. They believe it's a rare, inherited gift. So why is it a standard subject at Hogwarts? Hermione, despite her brilliant mind, couldn't master it and dropped the class. Dumbledore claims he kept Trelawney on staff only to protect her. But he also says divination was taught long before her. So, an entire school subject built on a talent almost no one possesses sounds a bit questionable. Number 9. Transfiguration. Rules. Magically bend. Transfiguration is sacred, dangerous, rule-bound. McGonagall makes that clear from day one. It is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn, she warns. No shortcuts, no exceptions. There are laws. You can't make food from nothing. You can't create life. And you don't mess with living beings unless you know exactly what you're doing. It's not a game. It's not a punishment. It's magic that can destroy. Then comes the Goblet of Fire. In the hallway, Draco Malfoy mouths off. He sneers, insults. And suddenly, he's a ferret. No warning, no spell, just a flash. Mad Eye Moody points, and poof, a boy becomes an animal, squealing, squirming, thrown down a hallway pipe. But here's the twist. It's not Moody. It's Barty Crouch Jr., a Death Eater in disguise, using powerful transfiguration magic like it's a toy, and no one stops him. McGonagall rushes in. She sees the ferret, sees the wand, and what does she say? Not, "That's illegal." Not, "You could have killed him." Just, "We never use transfiguration as a punishment." Seriously? She's more upset about discipline than magical ethics. A student just got morphed into a rodent, and everyone shrugs. No panic, no scandal, no ministry, inquiry. Number 10, wizards know nothing about muggles. Somehow. Wizards live beside muggles, but act like they've never seen one. In Order of the Phoenix, Arthur Weasley stares at a telephone like it's cursed. He pokes the buttons, frowns. "Is this how you do it?" he whispers. The man works in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office, and he's scared of a phone. He's not alone. Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic, meets the British Prime Minister and can't stop saying eclectricity like it's black magic. He's confused by everything. Paintings, weather, even doors. But wizards don't live underground. They pass through London, walk through King's Cross, visit muggle shops, they marry muggles, they raise muggle-born kids. How can they be this clueless? Hermione grew up with toothpaste, light switches, and buses. So did other muggle-borns. Seamus Finnegan has a muggle dad, Dean Thomas too. Yet Ron Weasley acts like batteries are science fiction. "You mean they run without magic?" he gasps, as if that's impossible. Arthur asks, "What is the function of a rubber duck?" It's funny, until you realize he's serious. The man works with muggle objects for a living, and no one has ever explained a bath toy. Hogwarts doesn't help. The one class on muggles is called Muggle Studies, but it's taught to students like Hermione, who already know everything. Meanwhile, purebloods get no education on the world they're hiding from. Number 11, Polyjuice Potion. Suddenly got easy. In the Chamber of Secrets, Polyjuice Potion is a legend, dangerous, complex, forbidden. Snape keeps the recipe locked in the restricted section. Hermione steals it. brewed in secret, in a girl's bathroom. It takes a month. One mistake and the drinker could die, or worse. Hermione nearly does. She uses cat hair by accident, ends up in the hospital wing with ears and a tail. "It's not supposed to be used by non-humans," Madame Pomfrey scolds. The message is clear. This potion is no joke, but just 2 books later, everything changes. In the Goblet of Fire, Barty Crouch Jr. drinks it daily. For an entire year, he impersonates Mad-Eye Moody perfectly. Voice, eye, magic. Even Dumbledore doesn't notice. And somehow, the potion keeps flowing. Unlimited supply, no trouble brewing it, no side effects. How? Crouch is a Death Eater on the run. Hiding in plain sight. Making advanced potions without help. Replenishing ingredients that take weeks to find. Nobody explains how. Nobody asks. The hardest potion in the world becomes a morning routine. Then in the Deathly Hallows, it gets even worse. Harry, Ron, and Hermione use Polyjuice like it's tea. Sip, transform, go. They infiltrate the Ministry. Escape. Use it again. Over and over, not a single brewing scene, not a single problem. But we remember how long it took Hermione, how many steps, how many rare ingredients, boomslang skin, lacewing flies, powdered horn of a bicorn. These aren't things you find in your kitchen drawer. And yet suddenly they have liters of it, enough to pass around, enough to store, enough for multiple missions. No danger, no difficulty, just drink and go. It's a plot device now, convenient, fast. Forget the rules, forget the warnings. The potion that once took a month now fits in a flask. That's not growth, that's inconsistency. It's number 12. Hogwarts' impenetrable protection is paper thin. Hogwarts is a fortress. That's what we've always been told. You can't apparate inside the castle, Hermione repeats, like it's law. Wards, barriers, enchantments layered for centuries. It's supposed to be impenetrable, and then comes the Goblet of Fire. The Triwizard Cup, bright, shining, celebrated, turns out to be a trap. A simple portkey. One touch, and Harry and Cedric are yanked across space. Gone. No resistance, no alarm. From the heart of Hogwarts to a graveyard soaked in death. How? How does a magical school with the highest protections fail to detect a portkey? It's not even complex magic. Arthur Weasley explains it to Harry in the Goblet of Fire, showing him an old boot in the middle of a field. It's a portkey, he says. Common, simple, easy to make. Yet no one questions placing one in the middle of the biggest magical event of the year. Barty Crouch Jr. does it effortlessly. Disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, he turns the Triwizard Cup into a trap. "I made it a portkey," he later confesses. One of the darkest wizards in disguise, modifying objects inside the school, and no one notices. So what are these protections worth? If a single portkey can bypass every ward, why didn't Voldemort use one sooner? Why not plant one in a book, a desk, a shoe? Why not lure Dumbledore or Harry out in their first year? Why wait until the 4th? The castle is supposed to repel dark magic, detect intrusions, hold back curses and infiltration, but a shiny trophy slips through it all. No barrier stops it, no spell blocks it. Hogwarts falls to the oldest trick in the book. Even Dumbledore doesn't explain it. He's shocked, furious, but offers no answers, just tells Harry to rest. "You have shown bravery beyond anything I could have expected," he says. Number 13. Time turners were a thing until they weren't. Time was broken, then forgotten, then erased. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Hermione Granger gets the most dangerous object in the wizarding world. A time turner, a necklace that bends time itself. And she uses it to attend extra classes. She spins it again and again, Days pass in hours. She's in 2 places at once. No one blinks. No one questions it. 3 turns should do it, Dumbledore says like it's nothing, like rewinding time is a school project. Then things get serious. Harry and Hermione use it to save Buckbeak and Sirius Black. 2 lives, 1 night. Time doesn't just shift, it saves. You must not be seen, Dumbledore warns. 1 mistake could tear the world apart. And then silence. After Azkaban, the time turner vanishes, gone, forgotten, never used again, even as worse things happen. Cedric dies, Dumbledore falls, Voldemort rises. No one says, let's go back. Why not? Why not save Fred, or Lupin, or stop the graveyard trap, stop Snape, stop anything? The time turner worked. We saw it. It changed fate. So why lock it away? Because it broke the story. 1 spin and every death is undone. Every mistake reversed. Too powerful, too perfect. So Rowling erased it. Quietly. No goodbyes. Later, in Order of the Phoenix, the time room is destroyed. Time turners shattered. But by then it's too late. 2 books passed. 2 years of silence. No one even tried. Dumbledore, the master planner, never touched it again. He let himself die. He let the war unfold. Why? Because the plot needed pain, needed loss. Time magic didn't fit anymore. The truth is simple. The time turner was a miracle, and the world of Harry Potter had no room for miracles, only consequences. Number 14, Platform 934 and the Muggle security problem. It's chaos. Every September 1st. Owls screech, cats hiss, children in robes crash through a wall at a Muggle train station, and no one bats an eye. Platform 934. The gateway to Hogwarts, hidden in plain sight, but not really hidden at all. When Harry first arrives, he's clueless. Then comes Molly Weasley, cheerful and loud. "All right, Percy, you go first," she says, right in front of dozens of muggles. Fred vanishes into stone. Then George. Then Ron. One by one, children disappear, while ordinary people walk past. Some even sit nearby. No one screams. No one calls the police. No one says, "Did that boy just run into a wall?" But this is the same world where secrecy is sacred. A flick of magic in front of a muggle, the ministry comes knocking. The statute of secrecy must be upheld at all costs, Cornelius Fudge says. Yet this brick wall swallows kids every year, publicly. Where are the spells, the guards, the excuses? We never hear about protective enchantments on the platform. No confundus charms, no obliviators on duty. Just trust that muggles will not see. That's not how reality works. Hundreds of wizard families storm the station every year, pushing trolleys, dragging pets, chasing children. It's not subtle. How has no one filmed it? How has no curious kid with a phone not gone viral with, "Look, my friend vanished into a wall"? Even Harry got dragged to court for using a Patronus near Dudley. Life-threatening situation. Still punished. But here? A dozen wizards shouting about magic and sprinting into barriers? Totally fine. The logic cracks. Maybe someone's confunding people? Maybe not. But if so, who? Where are they? Why do they let Molly shout instructions every single year? Why risk it all in a crowded station? Number 15. The Marauders map didn't notice Peter Pettigrew. Fred and George Weasley had a secret. Not just any secret. A magical masterpiece, the Marauders map, a living map of Hogwarts. It showed every room, every corridor, every soul, no matter how hidden, no matter how small. They used it for years, dodging teachers, sneaking out at night, planning chaos. The map never failed them. It showed names, all names, ghosts, teachers, students, even an emoji. So why didn't they see Peter Pettigrew? He was there, every single day, sleeping in their dorm, sitting next to Ron, eating with him, following him, always there. Peter Pettigrew, walking right beside Ron Weasley. The map would have shown it. It had to. Harry saw it. The prisoner of Azkaban, late at night, alone in the Gryffindor common room. "There's someone in the room with him," he said. "Peter Pettigrew." But Peter was supposed to be dead, blown up, gone. Yet the map said otherwise, and the map doesn't lie. Lupin confirmed it. The map never lies. So again, why didn't Fred and George notice? They weren't careless. They were brilliant, always watching, always planning. If they spotted Percy sneaking around with his girlfriend, why not Peter? A strange name, always near Ron, a man, not a student, sleeping in their dormitory. That should have set off alarms. It didn't. No one asked, no one wondered. For years, Pettigrew's name sat there, right under their noses, a traitor in the castle, sharing a bed with their brother. But no questions were asked. Some fans tried to explain it. Maybe the twins thought it was a glitch, or a ghost, or someone from a century ago. But the map showed movement, real-time steps. Peter was alive. He wasn't fading. He was walking, breathing, hiding in plain sight. Number 16, Slytherin, the House of Evil. In the grand, echoing halls of Hogwarts, where banners in crimson, gold, blue, and bronze sway with pride, there is one shade that seems forever caught in shadow. Green. Slytherin House, draped in emerald and silver, evokes hushed whispers and suspicious glances from the moment the sorting hat calls its name. It's a curious thing that in a school built on the ideals of unity and fairness, one house is burdened by a reputation that weighs heavier with each passing generation. And despite the castle's ancient magic, despite portraits that speak and staircases that shift, no spell has ever been cast to undo the prejudice woven into Slytherin's very name. The sorting hat in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone sings of Slytherin as a house of greatness, where dwell the cunning and the ambitious. Yet as soon as Harry Potter sits beneath that patched brim, he begs, "Not Slytherin, not Slytherin," to which the hat replies, "Are you sure? You could be great, you know, it's all here in your head, and Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness." Still, Harry resists, and the hat, reluctantly, places him in Gryffindor. This single moment in the very first book sets the tone for how readers, and the characters themselves, are meant to view Slytherin, not a place of potential, but of danger. The irony is almost painful. The house founded by Salazar Slytherin, a man once equal to Godric Gryffindor in vision and power, has become the default domain of antagonists. From Draco Malfoy's sneering arrogance to the very existence of Lord Voldemort, born Tom Riddle and proudly Slytherin, the narrative is riddled with green-tinted villains. Even Severus Snape, one of the most complex and redemptive figures in the series, is introduced through a cloud of suspicion, his Slytherin roots underscored with every icy glance and dark robe. But perhaps the real question lies not with the characters, but with the system that shaped them. How did Hogwarts, a school meant to nurture and protect, allow an entire house to be vilified for centuries? How did the staff, professors of wisdom and magical might, watch year after year as children of Slytherin were isolated, distrusted, and often feared? Consider Albus Dumbledore, the venerable headmaster known for his wisdom and compassion. He speaks often of the importance of unity and understanding, yet rarely do we see him defend Slytherin from the bias that permeates every corridor. When Ron Weasley casually says in the first book, There's not a single witch or wizard who went bad who wasn't in Slytherin. Dumbledore does not correct him. The silence of authority becomes its own kind of endorsement, a quiet nod to an unfair truth. Even the House Cup, which should celebrate achievement and merit, becomes a symbol of injustice. At the end of Philosopher's Stone, Slytherin is poised to win. Their banners hang, their students prepared to revel in victory. Then, in a dramatic turn, Dumbledore awards last-minute points to Harry, Ron, Hermione and Neville, just enough to snatch the cup from Slytherin's hands. It's a moment cheered by Gryffindors, but imagine being a Slytherin first year, watching your triumph unravel in the final breath. What lesson is learned? That even when you play by the rules, Hogwarts may bend them against you? There are other moments too, quieter but no less damaging. In Chamber of Secrets, suspicion immediately falls on Draco Malfoy when the heir of Slytherin is said to have returned. Though evidence is thin and motive uncertain, the students, and even the staff, seem all too ready to believe the worst. Again and again, the association between Slytherin and evil is reinforced, not only by peers, but by the very institution tasked with guiding young minds. And yet, within Slytherin's troubled ranks are students of brilliance, loyalty, and courage, though they are seldom acknowledged. Take Blaise Zabini, aloof and clever, who never sides openly with Voldemort's followers. Or Andromeda Black, cousin to Bellatrix, who defies her family's pureblood mania to marry a muggle-born. These are names rarely celebrated, yet their choices reflect the very virtues Hogwarts claims to value. The design of the castle itself reinforces the division. Slytherin's common room, deep beneath the lake, is cold and dark, lit by the eerie shimmer of green water. In contrast, Gryffindor Tower is warm, golden and high above the ground. The symbolism is almost too blatant. Light above, shadow below. Why should the Slytherins be buried, both literally and metaphorically, beneath their peers? Even among professors there is bias. Professor McGonagall, fiercely loyal to Gryffindor, often displays open disdain for the Slytherins, while Professor Snape, head of Slytherin, bends rules to protect his own, but rarely advocates for the house's reputation as a whole. Instead of serving as a bridge between Slytherin and the other houses, Snape becomes another reason for mistrust, his favoritism mirroring the very divisions he ought to heal. It is telling that the Sorting Hat itself recognizes the problem. In Order of the Phoenix, its song warns of the growing rift between houses and the danger it brings. Though condemned I am to split you, still I worry that it's wrong. The Hat, which exists solely to sort students, voices concern about the consequences of its task. If even a magical artifact can sense the rot of prejudice, why has no human teacher acted to mend it? Slytherin's legacy is further complicated by the rise of Voldemort. After his defeat, the fear of his followers continues to stain the house. Children of Death Eaters are eyed with suspicion, and the assumption is that evil is inherited like heirlooms. No one seems to ask what it's like to grow up in Slytherin after the war, to bear the weight of crimes you didn't commit. Are these children offered counseling, compassion, or simply a new set of bars for an invisible cage? When the Battle of Hogwarts begins, all Slytherins are sent to the dungeons. It's a line that passes quickly in the book, but its meaning is heavy. While others are asked to choose, fight or flee, Slytherins are not trusted with the choice. They are punished for potential, not action. Later we learn that some returned to fight, but their names are not recorded. Their bravery is not sung in the Great Hall. Number 17, Triwizard Tournament, no safety, all drama. The Triwizard Tournament, a time-honoured magical tradition, returned to Hogwarts in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire with promises of glory, spectacle, and supposedly improved safety. Yet from the moment the champions were selected, it was painfully clear that the word safety had become a decorative term, uttered for formality, but ignored in practice. The tournament's very first challenge hurled teenage students into a deadly confrontation with dragons, massive, fire-breathing beasts whose temperament is so volatile that entire divisions of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures are dedicated solely to their containment. Harry, who was only 14, had not even volunteered to compete. Nevertheless, he found himself standing in the arena, his heart pounding as he faced the Hungarian Horntail. The most vicious of the lot, as Charlie Weasley grimly explained. "That's not just dangerous," Hermione whispered, white-faced in the stands. "That's insane." The beast broke free of its chains in full view of a screaming crowd, sending spells and debris flying as it pursued Harry through the open air. Not only was the boy's life at risk, but the very spectators were placed in the path of its fury. The wards meant to protect the audience evidently faltered, or were never strong enough to begin with. How could an institution like Hogwarts, with centuries of magical knowledge at its fingertips, allow something so reckless? The answer, perhaps, lies in tradition. The tournament had been banned centuries earlier after multiple student deaths. These were not minor injuries or disqualifications. Students had died. The historical records, though rarely discussed, were clear about that. And yet, with only vague reassurances that precautions had been taken, Dumbledore and the other organizers resumed the competition as though nothing had changed. The champions will face challenges designed to test their daring, their powers of deduction, and their ability to cope with danger, Barty Crouch Sr. announced during the selection. Danger, not simulated difficulty. Actual danger, real enough to scar, to maim, to kill. The second task did not fall short of this terrifying standard. The champions were told only that something dear to them had been taken, and that they would have 1 hour to retrieve it from the depths of the Black Lake. What they weren't told was that they would descend into waters filled with Grindylows, murky shadows, and other deep-sea threats. Harry, swimming beneath the surface, aided only by gillyweed from Neville, encountered merpeople wielding tridents and a colony of aggressive Grindylows that clawed at his robes. Harry struggled, kicking with all his might, the text recounts, but the Grindylows were strong, and they had long fingers that wrapped around his arms and legs. More shocking still was the moral ambiguity of the task. The champions were told to rescue hostages, people they believed to be in danger, only to later be informed it was a ruse. What if one had panicked, as Fleur Delacour did, and failed to return? What if Harry, unaware that the hostages weren't actually at risk, hadn't decided to rescue more than just his own friend? Only one champion returned with more than one hostage, Dumbledore later said with a twinkle in his eye. Yet beneath that sparkle lay a haunting question. Was he truly indifferent to the idea that someone might have drowned? The third task, a hedge maze filled with enchantments, traps, and creatures, sounded innocuous in concept. But this was not a game of hide-and-seek. "The maze will be grown to a height of 10 feet, Bagman announced, and the champions will face obstacles as they try to reach the Triwizard Cup. These obstacles included blast-ended Scroots, Boggarts, and a Sphinx that could attack if provoked. But none of those dangers compared to what lay in wait at the centre, a portkey to a graveyard where Lord Voldemort would rise again. Here, the lack of basic magical security was damning. Not only was a dark artifact smuggled into Hogwarts undetected, but Barty Crouch Jr., a known Death Eater, infiltrated the school using Polyjuice potion and impersonated a professor for an entire year. He manipulated the entire tournament under Dumbledore's nose, turning each task into a death march for Harry. "You have been taught how to duel, Harry Potter," Voldemort sneered in the graveyard. "We are not playing hide-and-seek now." That moment, Cedric Diggory lying dead, Harry bleeding and surrounded by Death Eaters, wasn't just the result of dark magic. It was the consequence of negligence dressed as tradition. And yet, there had been warnings. Moody, or rather Crouch in Disguise, repeatedly emphasized constant vigilance. But the real vigilance was absent. The Goblet of Fire, meant to be a secure, impartial selector, was duped using a confundus charm. The age line drawn by Dumbledore was useless. No one double-checked the magical protections. No one considered the implications of a fourth name emerging. "Someone's put your name in that goblet knowing you'd have to compete if it came out," Sirius Black later told Harry. "They're trying to kill you." Sirius wasn't exaggerating, and what's worse, even after Cedric's death, the Ministry of Magic refused to acknowledge the gravity of what had happened. "Accidents happen," Cornelius Fudge blustered, trying to frame the entire situation as a tragic misstep rather than a harbinger of war. The safety of students had been sold for the illusion of spectacle. The tournament had been transformed into a weapon, and the adults in charge had failed to see the signs until it was too late. Even the presence of magical medical professionals like Madame Pomfrey couldn't compensate for the danger. She could treat minor injuries, burns, bites, and broken bones. But death? There is no spell to bring back the dead. The tournament's reliance on magical solutions created a false sense of security. When Fleur was nearly attacked by the Scroots in the maze, when Crumb was found using the Cruciatus curse under the Imperius curse, no immediate rescue teams arrived. The maze had to be manually scanned for survivors. If Harry and Cedric hadn't touched the cup together, who would have found them? And in what condition? Fred and George Weasley, who attempted to circumvent the age restriction, ended up with long beards and were thrown across the room. It was played for laughs. "We'll split the 1,000 galleons between the three of us," they joked. But it revealed another grim truth. The protections were reactive, not proactive. They punished those who tried to break rules, but they didn't prevent far more dangerous infractions like Crouch's infiltration. Number 18. Basic education. What's that? It is a curious paradox that in the most prestigious magical school in Britain, children as young as 11 are expected to brew complex potions, transfigure live animals, and repel dark curses. Yet, they are never once taught how to multiply, compose a formal letter, or understand the geography of their own world. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry opens its ancient doors to students with no clear concern for their foundational education. And while this oversight may be buried under the excitement of floating feathers and wand movements, the question remains, why does Hogwarts entirely neglect basic, elementary learning? Take Ron Weasley, for instance. When we meet him on the Hogwarts Express, he is charming, funny, and completely ignorant of the simplest muggle customs. This ignorance is understandable. He was raised in a magical household, but it extends to even basic logic and numeracy. Throughout the series, Ron consistently struggles with time management, organization, and basic analytical skills. His mother, Molly Weasley, presumably educated him at home, but there's no mention of lessons in reading comprehension or basic arithmetic. When has Ron ever mentioned studying long division or world history? Never. Draco Malfoy presents a similar case. A pure-blood wizard from an affluent family, he is arrogant and cunning, but never once do we see him reading a classic novel or writing a formal essay that requires structured argumentation. His intelligence is street smart, or rather castle smart, but lacks the depth and breadth that one might expect from a young man his age. He knows Latin-rooted incantations and the family trees of pure-bloods, but can he solve a basic algebraic equation or understand the laws of physics that govern the non-magical world? It seems unlikely. Contrast this with Hermione Granger. Born to two muggle dentists, she attended a regular muggle school until she turned 11. Her obsession with books, rules, and knowledge is not just a personality quirk, it's a survival mechanism. Hermione brings to Hogwarts what no one else does, an actual foundation in education. It's no wonder she outshines her classmates. She doesn't merely memorize spells, she understands them, contextualizes them, and often questions their ethical implications. Remember when she says, "Honestly, don't you two read?" to Harry and Ron? Her frustration isn't just academic snobbery, it's a cry for intellectual engagement. But the tragedy is that Hermione's background is never acknowledged as an advantage. Hogwarts acts as though magical education begins and ends with magic. There are no classes in essay writing or critical thinking unless it pertains to magical theory. Students are not taught how to structure arguments, evaluate evidence, or conduct basic research unless it involves digging through ancient spellbooks. The library is vast but filled with arcane texts. Where are the encyclopedias? Where is the literature? Shakespeare, Dickens, Austen. When Harry first enters Hogwarts, he is stunned by the grandeur of the Great Hall, the enchanted ceiling, and the sorting hat that speaks. But nowhere is he asked to prove his reading level or demonstrate his basic knowledge of world history. The assumption is that if you have magic, you don't need anything else. But this is a dangerous illusion. Throughout the books, Harry often lacks the analytical skills to truly understand the events around him. He is brave, yes, but when has he ever asked a philosophical question or engaged in a debate about magical ethics? This intellectual vacuum becomes particularly glaring in classes like Divination, where vague predictions and emotional intuition replace any semblance of empirical reasoning. Professor Trelawney babbles about the grim and reads tea leaves, but never once teaches her students about the scientific method or the concept of probability. There's no skepticism, no encouragement to challenge authority. What kind of education is that? Even the more grounded subjects, like herbology or care of magical creatures, lack foundational context. Students learn how to handle mandrakes and hippogriffs, but are never taught the basics of biology or zoology. How do these magical creatures fit into the broader web of life? What are their ecosystems, their evolutionary origins? The answer is always, don't ask, just memorize. When Neville Longbottom shines in herbology, it's because of passion and intuition, not because of a structured understanding of botany. The lack of math is especially puzzling. Potions, for instance, is a subject that cries out for precision. Professor Snape demands exact measurements and careful timing, berating students like Neville for their incompetence. Yet nowhere is there a class that teaches students how to handle ratios, proportions, or chemical reactions. It's as if they're expected to instinctively grasp complex procedures without any prior training. You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making, Snape says, but how can one master science without the scientific basics? And then there's history of magic, taught by the ghostly Professor Binns, whose droning lectures lull students to sleep. This is the closest Hogwarts gets to a traditional humanities course, but it is a missed opportunity. Instead of encouraging critical thinking or connecting magical events to broader historical patterns, Binns recites dates and names in monotone. There are no discussions, no debates, no written analyses. It's rote memorization, and it deadens the curiosity it should awaken. It's worth noting that Wizarding Society itself seems to suffer from this educational gap. The Ministry of Magic is riddled with corruption, inefficiency, and poor planning. The Daily Prophet routinely publishes misleading or biased stories, and the general public is easily swayed by fear and propaganda. Could this be a result of an education system that teaches children how to duel, but not how to think? Perhaps the rise of Voldemort and the acceptance of his ideology stem in part from a population that lacks the tools to question authority.
Number 19, the trace tracks everyone and no one.
The rules were clear, and Harry had heard them enough times to memorize them by heart. Any magical activity which occurs in the vicinity of a muggle residence, especially when performed by underage wizards, will be traced and punished accordingly. It was a law etched into the very bones of the magical world, a rule that clung to the shoulders of every child born with magic. But what if that law was flawed? What if the Ministry's precious trace didn't work the way they claimed it did? At the start of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, we witness an event that seems small at first, almost comical. A hovering cake, a startled aunt, a scream, and then a letter from the Ministry, sharp as a blade, lands in Harry's lap. We received intelligence that a hover charm was used at your place of residence this evening. But the truth was far stranger. Harry hadn't used magic. Dobby had, a house elf, a creature technically outside of Ministry jurisdiction, and yet the trace had pointed its invisible finger directly at Harry Potter. It was a moment that changed everything. Not just for Harry, but for every reader paying close attention. The Ministry could not tell who cast the spell, only that it had occurred near an underage wizard. It was as if the trace was less a magical GPS and more a tripwire set to trigger the moment anything sparkled unnaturally within range of a magical child. The implications of this were enormous and disturbingly unfair. If Harry had lived in a wizarding household, surrounded by other magical people, the hover charm wouldn't have raised a single alarm. Think of the Burrow, home to the Weasleys, a place that hums with magic day and night. Fred and George probably hexed each other before breakfast. Molly used her wand to cook, clean, and keep order. Yet Ron never mentioned receiving howlers from the Ministry over floating pans or dancing dishes. Why? Because the trace, for all its menace, could not detect individual wand signatures. It simply assumed guilt by proximity. The system, in its core, was built on assumption Harry was punished not for using magic, but for being near it. That was all it took. One spell near an underage wizard. No consideration for context, no investigation, no magical forensics. A flat accusation, a flat punishment, the kind of system that didn't just enforce order, it crushed innocence under its heel. This discrepancy becomes more haunting when you look at pure blood families like the Malfoys. Draco lived in a mansion soaked in old magic. Spells likely bounced off the walls, charms for preservation, security, glamour. Yet no trace seemed to interfere with his life. In fact, when Lucius Malfoy slipped Tom Riddle's diary into Ginny's cauldron at Flourish and Blots, he did so in full public view, confident that no one would dare question his son's innocence. That level of arrogance only comes when the system favors you. It's no surprise that Muggleborns were disproportionately affected. Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, lived in a household entirely devoid of magic. Had she cast even a single lumos at home, the Ministry would have known immediately. She was watched not as an individual, but as a class, a child from a non-magical family, already under suspicion simply by circumstance. This double standard isn't just about magic, it's about trust. And in the eyes of the Ministry, Muggle-borns and half-bloods had to earn trust, while pure-bloods inherited it by birth. Consider this. Had Ron Weasley used a spell at the Burrow during the summer, no owl would have come. No letter, no threat, nothing. But when Harry, the orphaned son of a Muggle-raised witch and a pure-blood father, lived in the Dursleys' home, every flicker of magic became a crime scene. And when Dobby tried to protect Harry, the Ministry didn't care who had cast the spell. The trace lit up, and that was enough. Case closed. Guilt assumed. What's worse is the lack of evolution in the system. Magical technology, if one can call it that, had advanced far enough to create time-turners, self-writing quills, and magically maintained maps of entire castles, and yet the trace remained hopelessly crude. Why hadn't the Ministry developed a way to identify wand signatures or detect the magical residue of the caster? Surely it wouldn't have been impossible. The fact that they hadn't suggests they didn't want to, because a flawed system benefits those who wield it. By keeping the trace deliberately vague, the Ministry maintained the power to threaten and punish without recourse. It allowed them to police wizarding children without ever needing proof. And when questioned, they could shrug and say, "It's the law." No need for trials, no need for truth. One might wonder, was this why Sirius Black, unjustly imprisoned, never had a trial? Was this why so many injustices seemed to quietly slip through the cracks? If the trace, a spell meant to protect, was so carelessly applied, what did that say about the rest of the Ministry's methods? Even Arthur Weasley, one of the few truly just men in the government, never questioned the trace. When Harry arrived at the Burrow and described what happened, the Weasleys were sympathetic but never surprised. It was known, accepted. That's just how the Ministry worked. Everyone knew the rules were broken, but no one tried to fix them. And there's something else. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore arrives at Privet Drive to collect Harry. He casts several spells, non-verbal, complex, powerful, right there in the living room. Yet no owl arrives, no reprimand. Why? Because Harry is with an adult wizard? Because Dumbledore's status somehow negates the trace? If the system were truly neutral, it would have triggered regardless of prestige. Instead, it stayed silent, selective, biased. The same happens in Order of the Phoenix, when a team of wizards apparates directly into Little Whinging to escort Harry. Spells fly, lights flash, Tonks knocks over a lamp with her wand. Still no trace is mentioned. It seems the Ministry can choose when to look, and more importantly, when to look away. This selective enforcement becomes a weapon. In the beginning of Order of the Phoenix, Harry is nearly expelled for defending himself with a Patronus, a life-saving spell against Dementors. The Ministry's response? A trial, a full hearing, attempted expulsion, not because Harry broke the law, but because the law was suddenly useful to those who wanted him silenced. Dolores Umbridge embodies this perversion of law. She uses rules not to protect, but to suppress. Her Ministry-backed crusade against Dumbledore's army hinges on one idea, that underage magic, even discussion of defense, is dangerous unless sanctioned. The trace is part of that control, a leash, not a shield. So where does this leave us? With a broken law, applied unevenly, and used more often to punish than to protect. A law that allowed a house elf's magic to almost get a child expelled. A law that ignored the Malfoy household entirely. A law that sent a warning letter to Harry but never bothered Lucius, even as he distributed dark artifacts to children. It paints a damning picture of wizarding society, a world where the appearance of order matters more than justice, where control is masked as protection, and where a child like Harry, marked, watched, isolated, can become a target not because he breaks the rules, but because the rules were written to break him. In a fair world, the trace would be intelligent. It would detect who cast the spell. It would understand context. It would distinguish between a boy and a house elf, between defense and offense, between necessity and mischief. But this is not a fair world. This is the world of the Ministry of Magic. And so the trace remains, an invisible chain around the necks of young witches and wizards. It follows them like a ghost, silent until it strikes. It knows where they live. It watches from the shadows. And when it speaks, it does so with the authority of law, but never with the voice of truth. Number 20, Dumbledore and the Disappearing Invisibility Cloak. Of all the mysteries surrounding Albus Dumbledore, None is more quietly unnerving than his possession of the invisibility cloak, one of the fabled Deathly Hallows. It was no ordinary magical object. This cloak had passed from Ignotus Peverell down through the Potter bloodline, a sacred heirloom that had escaped the wear of time. When James Potter lent the cloak to Dumbledore, he could not have foreseen that he'd never see it again, nor could he have predicted that it would remain hidden for nearly a decade, locked away in the hands of a man who rarely acted without reason. But therein lies the question. What reason could Dumbledore have had? According to the books, Dumbledore returns the cloak to Harry on Christmas Day of his first year at Hogwarts. A mysterious note accompanied it. "Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well." No name signed it. No explanation followed. For an object of such significance, one of the three hallows, said to render the wearer invisible even to death itself, this passing on of the cloak seems almost casual, even rushed. We know from the tales of Beedle the Bard that the cloak of invisibility was unlike others. It did not fade, it did not fray. It offered true concealment, even from magical detection. It was the only hallow not created by a wand-maker, but gifted by Death himself, at least according to legend. Ignotus Peverell, its first known owner, used it to evade death and passed it to his son upon dying of natural causes. The cloak then wove its way through generations of Potters until James lent it to Dumbledore. But why? The books remain vague. Dumbledore only ever mentions it to Harry in Deathly Hallows, saying, "I had it in my possession because I had asked your father to let me examine it. I was curious, as I have long suspected that it was in fact the third of the Deathly Hallows." A simple statement, but loaded with implication. Dumbledore by then was already chasing the Hallows. He had the Elder Wand. He had studied the Resurrection Stone. The cloak, the final piece of the puzzle, had eluded him until James. But James trusted Dumbledore. Perhaps he believed the headmaster was doing scholarly research. Perhaps he saw no harm in letting him borrow it. After all, who could have guessed that Voldemort would strike so soon? That the prophecy would become real? That the cloak, once taken, would never be returned to James again? Dumbledore's motivations are often a dance of light and shadow. He is a man of immense knowledge, but also great secrets. If he truly sought the Hallows, as he once did with Grindelwald, then the cloak was more than just an artifact to him. It was the final relic in a mythical trinity. But by the time he had it, Dumbledore had supposedly abandoned his youthful obsession with power. Why then keep it? One theory suggests that Dumbledore simply wished to protect the cloak. If the Death Eaters had raided the Potter house and found it, they might have destroyed or misused it. Keeping it at Hogwarts under enchantment and lock ensured its safety. But this theory falters under scrutiny. The cloak was a family heirloom. Had Dumbledore truly wanted to protect it, he might have returned it to Lily after James's death, or later to Harry, long before Hogwarts. For nearly 10 years, the cloak remained hidden. During that time, Harry lived under the Dursley stairs, starved of love, identity, and belonging. The cloak would not have erased that pain, but it could have offered solace. Imagine young Harry sneaking away from his tormentors under a veil of invisibility. For a child desperate to escape, the cloak would have been a treasure. And yet Dumbledore waited. Why? Some readers believe he was testing Harry, that Dumbledore wanted Harry to begin his journey into the magical world without advantages, but that seems cruel even for a man who often walked the edge of moral ambiguity. Others suggest he was preparing Harry for the larger task ahead, destroying the Horcrux within him, facing Voldemort, choosing between Hallows and Horcruxes. But that task was not yet known. In Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore had no idea how the events would unfold. Still, the timing of the cloak's return is significant. It is given to Harry on Christmas, the season of rebirth of hidden gifts. It allows Harry and his friends to explore the forbidden third-floor corridor where Fluffy guards the entrance to the trapdoor and eventually the Philosopher's Stone. Without the cloak, Harry might not have begun that journey. Did Dumbledore plan this? If so, it casts his actions in a new light. Perhaps Dumbledore wanted Harry to confront the stone. Perhaps the cloak was a tool, a key placed at the right time to unlock the next stage of Harry's development. In that case, the cloak was not delayed. It was delivered with precision. But this too invites discomfort. It means Dumbledore orchestrated Harry's path from the shadows, manipulating him with gifts and trials. Throughout the books, Dumbledore struggles with guilt over his manipulations. In Deathly Hallows, he confesses to Harry, "I had proven as a very young man that power was my weakness and my temptation." Perhaps keeping the cloak was another instance of that temptation, an unconscious desire to possess all three Hallows even after swearing off them. He kept the Elder Wand. He used the Resurrection Stone. Why not keep the cloak even if only to look upon it? It is possible, too, that Dumbledore feared what would happen if all three Hallows were united again, if the cloak had gone to Harry as a child, and the Elder Wand later passed to him through Draco, and the stone tempted him through the resurrection quest. Could a young boy have resisted the pull of invincibility? Could anyone? The Hallows were dangerous, not only because of their powers, but because of the desires they awakened. Dumbledore knew that better than anyone. He had seen what obsession with the Hallows had done to him and Grindelwald. He had held Ariana's broken body in his arms. Perhaps he feared that same path for Harry. But then why return the cloak at all? Because in the end, Dumbledore believed in choice. He believed that love, not death, was the answer to power. Harry was not like him. Harry had the strength to choose right, even when offered ultimate power. Giving him the cloak was, in a way, a test of that belief, a sign that Dumbledore still hoped, still trusted. The cloak became more than a tool. It became a symbol. In Deathly Hallows, Harry uses it to walk into the Forbidden Forest, to face death itself. It is not the Elder Wand that protects him, not the stone that gives him courage. It is the cloak, his father's cloak, passed down through blood and sacrifice, that shields him as he faces Voldemort. In that moment, the cloak is no longer just one of the Hallows. It is a bridge between life and death, between past and future, between James and Harry, between Dumbledore and his final lesson. And perhaps that's the answer. Dumbledore kept the cloak not out of malice, but because he knew its moment had not yet come. He believed in stories, in timing, in symbols. The cloak returned when it was needed, when Harry was old enough to understand its power and gentle enough to use it wisely. Still, the delay remains haunting. A relic of Dumbledore's flaws, his secrets, and the quiet manipulations that shaped Harry's life. He may have meant well, but even well-meaning men can falter. Even wizards as great as Dumbledore can make mistakes that echo through generations. So the question lingers, as all great questions do. Why did Dumbledore keep the cloak for so long? Was it for study, for safety, for control? We may never know, but what we do know is this. The cloak passed from father to son, not because of fate, but because of choice. And in the world of magic, there is no power greater than the choices we make, even if they remain invisible. Number 21, the magic mirror that could have saved Sirius. When Sirius Black handed Harry Potter a small square mirror wrapped in old parchment, the gesture seemed insignificant. He said, "Use it if you need me. You'll be able to contact me through this." It was a quiet moment, easily overshadowed by the chaos surrounding their final departure from Grim Old Place. Yet within that mirror, magical, powerful, and so incredibly rare, lay a solution to a future tragedy that would go wholly unheeded. The mirror was part of a two-way communication device. There were two of them, twins, reflections of each other. Sirius kept one, and the other was meant for Harry. Through these enchanted glass panes they could speak, see each other, and keep in touch, no matter the distance. A perfect tool for a world brimming with uncertainty and danger. But fate, or perhaps negligence, saw to it that this gift was left in the bottom of a trunk until it was far too late. The absurdity becomes almost painful when one revisits the events of Order of the Phoenix. Harry, plagued by disturbing visions of Sirius being tortured at the Department of Mysteries, acted on instinct. He believed the vision to be real and did not think to question it. He sought verification, he asked Creature, he used Umbridge's fireplace, he risked everything, but he never reached for the mirror, not once. It wasn't until Sirius had fallen through the veil in the death chamber, struck by Bellatrix Lestrange's curse, that Harry remembered the mirror. Grief-stricken, he rummaged through his belongings and uncovered it, cracked and forgotten. In Chapter 38, the Second War begins, Rowling writes, "He pulled it out, turned it over in his hands. A shard of glass fell out and splintered on the floor. And in that single line, the missed opportunity shattered all over again. How could such a thing happen?" It's tempting to lay the blame on Harry. After all, he was 15, reckless, emotional, often acting on impulse. But the deeper question, the more disturbing one, is why Sirius himself never used it. He was the one confined to Grimmauld Place, restless, desperate to contribute. He had every reason to check in on his godson, especially during the months when Umbridge had her claws deep into Hogwarts. The mirror could have offered him peace of mind, but he too forgot. Or perhaps in his own recklessness, he didn't think it was necessary. This failure wasn't born out of a single moment, but stretched across time, composed of 1,000 small choices that snowballed into tragedy. When Harry was having nightmares, seeing into Voldemort's mind, why didn't he use the mirror? When he suspected something was deeply wrong, why didn't Sirius suggest it himself? There's an eerie silence around the object, as though the narrative itself was instructed to ignore it. Even Lupin, wise, careful, and usually attentive, never mentioned the mirror. When Harry reached Grimmauld Place that summer, surrounded by Order members, not one of them emphasized the importance of secure communication. And yet they knew the stakes. Dumbledore knew, Mad Eye knew, Tonks, Kingsley. Every one of them could have asked Hig, "Harry, do you still have Sirius's mirror?" It's not as though the mirror was a small trinket. Its utility was massive. In a world where flu powder was traceable and owls could be intercepted, this mirror offered something no other method could: privacy, instant access, safety. It was the wizarding equivalent of a secure line in the muggle world. No passwords, no risk of being overheard. But perhaps that's exactly why it had to be forgotten. A plot that leaned too heavily on logic wouldn't allow for the emotional gut punch of Sirius's death. Still, readers were left stunned by the oversight, not just because it seemed unrealistic, but because it contradicted everything we knew about Sirius. He was fiercely protective of Harry, even to the point of recklessness. He risked exposure by appearing in a Gryffindor fireplace. He sent letters. He used dangerous methods just to check in, but never the mirror. Did he assume Harry would use it first? Was it a test of trust? Or did Sirius, so often ruled by emotion, simply forget the most rational option he had? The tragedy unfolds in layers. When Harry finally picks up the broken mirror and sees a flash of blue eyes, he doesn't realize who they belong to. He later assumes it's Dumbledore, but it isn't. It's Aberforth, Dumbledore's brother, who owned the second mirror after Sirius's death. Even in its fractured state, the mirror remained powerful. It's still connected to someone, but not to the person Harry had needed. There's a poetic horror to the idea that this enchanted object lay silent while the Department of Mysteries burned with curses and screams. That within Harry's possession was a lifeline that could have changed everything. A simple word spoken into the mirror might have summoned Sirius, or at least clarified the truth. Are you at home? Are you safe? Those few seconds of confirmation would have prevented 6 students from risking their lives. Would have saved Sirius. But it wasn't to be. The mirror, for all its wonder, became a symbol of regret, of paths not taken. Rowling never returned to its power in full. It resurfaced in Deathly Hallows, but never again with the same implications. By then, it was a remnant of failure. In many ways, it mirrors Harry himself. Young, powerful, full of potential, but burdened by his inability to see the whole picture. And it reflects Sirius too, brave, brilliant, but flawed, both victim and architect of their downfall. One could argue the story needed the tragedy, that the death of Sirius was necessary to push Harry further into the real world of sacrifice and war, but that doesn't erase the sting. It lingers because it didn't need to happen. That's the genius and the cruelty of it. The missed opportunity feels too human to ignore. In the aftermath, when Harry holds the mirror to his chest and cries, we're not just mourning Sirius, we're mourning the very idea that something so simple, so elegant, went unused. We're mourning the silence. Rowling herself never fully explains the mirror's neglect. It's a deliberate gap, a narrative wound. Perhaps that's why it hurts so much, because in that absence, readers are left to wrestle with the what-ifs. What if Harry had remembered? What if Sirius had reached out? What if the Order had valued clarity over secrecy? One might even call the mirror cursed, not in the dark, enchanted sense, but in the way it represents guilt. It became a relic of failure, a magical object bound to a death that could have been prevented. When Dumbledore tells Harry, indifference and neglect often do more damage than outright dislike, it's impossible not to think of the mirror lying untouched at the bottom of Harry's trunk. Even Creature, whose twisted loyalty led to Harry's deception, might have been outwitted if the mirror had been used. There would have been no need to trust a house elf steeped in bitterness, no need to sneak into Umbridge's fireplace. The mirror would have provided answers without risk, without war. What's perhaps most haunting is that the characters never reflect on this mistake. Harry never curses himself for forgetting it. Sirius never mentions it again. It simply disappears from the narrative like a whisper, as if admitting its usefulness would shatter the plot's careful design. The mirror might have changed everything, but it didn't. Not because it failed, but because no one used it. In that way, it becomes one of the most heartbreaking objects in the series. Not a cursed locket, not a deadly wand, but a forgotten gift meant to save, ignored, until it was far too late. And so it sits there, still, silent and cracked. A perfect metaphor for the broken bond it was supposed to preserve. A reminder that in times of desperation, the tools we need most are often the ones we ignore. Number 22. Voldemort and the Forgotten Horcrux. Checkup. When Tom Riddle stood before the mirror of Erist, longing not for love or family but for power and eternal life, his journey towards splitting his soul had already begun. He believed that immortality would be his shield, the ultimate weapon against the chains of mortality. So he committed the darkest of magical acts again and again until he had hidden 7 fragments of his soul in 7 different vessels. Each one was supposed to be protected by cunning, by fear, and above all, by secrecy. But there was a flaw in his design, not in the magic itself, but in the mind of the man who cast it. He forgot to check. The destruction of the diary in the Chamber of Secrets was not just a lost artifact. It was the loss of a piece of Voldemort's soul, a deep wound in the fabric of his unnatural immortality. When Harry stabbed the diary with the basilisk fang, ink spurted like blood, and Tom Riddle, the ghost-like memory of the past, screamed in agony before vanishing into nothing. It was a Horcrux. Dumbledore knew. Harry didn't, and Voldemort, well, Voldemort never found out. That is where the story becomes not just dark, but tragic in a way the Dark Lord would never have believed possible. After his resurrection in the Little Hangleton graveyard, Voldemort had all the time, means and paranoia to secure his immortality again. And yet not once did he revisit the cave where he had hidden the locket. Not once did he inspect the vault at Gringotts, where the cup of Helga Hufflepuff lay beneath layers of curses. Not once did he glance into the old shack of the Gaunts to see if the ring of his ancestor still waited in the stone house among the snakes and the weeds. For a man who had outwitted death itself, his neglect was baffling. We must ask why. Why did Voldemort, the most meticulous of villains, fail to confirm the survival of his soul fragments? The answer lies not in magical theory, but in character. Voldemort's flaw was always arrogance, arrogance so profound that it became blindness. He believed no one could find his Horcruxes because he believed no one would ever guess he made them. Few would want it, Tom, very few. "Death is final, isn't it?" said Professor Slughorn in the memory Harry watched. But Tom was not like the rest. He thought himself superior to all, including death, and so he believed his secret was safe. Yet Dumbledore had pieced it together. Slowly, painfully, using Harry's memories and the few whispers left in the magical world, he tracked down the Horcruxes. He found the ring in the ruins of the Gaunt home. He found the locket, although only after it had been stolen by Regulus Black, a name Voldemort never bothered to remember. Regulus, the younger brother of Sirius Black, had discovered the truth and turned against his master. "I know I will be dead long before you read this," he wrote in his letter, left in the fake locket. And Voldemort? He never found the note. He never knew. The cave, filled with inferi and cursed waters, was meant to terrify. It was Voldemort's idea of a perfect trap, something no ordinary wizard could penetrate. He placed the locket there as a testament to his genius. But he never checked it again. Not even once. He trusted in the cruelty of his own mind more than he trusted in vigilance. And so when Kreacher helped Regulus escape the cave, though only temporarily, it was a betrayal Voldemort never even suspected. The real locket was removed. In its place lay a worthless fake. At Gringotts he relied on Bellatrix Lestrange's pride and insanity to guard the cup of Hufflepuff. But Bellatrix was not unbreakable. When Hermione impersonated her using Polyjuice potion, she walked right into the Lestrange vault. "They're thieves, Griphook! They've broken into a vault!" Bellatrix shrieked in horror when she learned what had happened. But the damage had already been done. The cup was stolen, burned by basilisk venom, destroyed. Still Voldemort did not realize. Even when he felt the disturbance within himself, he felt it. He felt the locket vanish from the world, felt the cup disappear, the diadem shatter. Rowling wrote, "He did not know what had truly happened, because he had never bothered to check, because he assumed no one else could possibly understand his secrets. His genius, in his own eyes, was absolute. Let us not forget the ring of Marvolo Gaunt, heavy with blood magic and heritage, lay in the ruins of the old home. There, Dumbledore found it, took it, examined it, and destroyed it. And with it came the cost, the curse that withered his hand and counted his final days. The Horcrux was gone, and Voldemort never knew. Even when Dumbledore's hand turned black, Voldemort, master of dark curses, never suspected that his most sacred secret had been found. The diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw, hidden in the Room of Requirement amongst junk and forgotten relics, was destroyed by Vincent Crabbe's fiendfire. Crabbe, an unremarkable boy, became an accidental hero. And Voldemort, he never realized that his precious diadem had been reduced to ash until the very final moments of his life. It is almost poetic that the man who tore his soul into pieces did not care enough to count them. He knew they existed. He knew where he put them. But after returning to life, he never revisited the places that housed his immortality. I, who have gone further than anybody along the path that leads to immortality, you know my goal, eternal life. To conquer death, he once said to his Death Eaters. And yet, when his soul was dying one piece at a time, he was blind. When Nagini was killed by Neville Longbottom, Voldemort felt it, truly, for the first time. The last tether to his immortality was cut in a moment of reckless bravery by a boy he had dismissed. That was when the truth finally hit him, and it was too late. There is tragedy in this story, not because we pity Voldemort, his crimes make him undeserving of our sympathy, but because his downfall was so avoidable. If only he had gone back, if only he had returned to the cave and realized the locket was gone, if only he had asked Bellatrix to show him the vault, if only he had checked the gaunt house. One visit, one act of vigilance, and the entire chain of events could have changed. Instead, he focused all his energy on killing Harry Potter, not realizing that Harry too carried a piece of his soul. The greatest irony of all, Voldemort had hidden Horcruxes in objects of power, but had unknowingly made one in his enemy. Is it not the nature of power to reveal the truth of the soul? Dumbledore once mused. Voldemort's truth was this: he trusted only fear, and he believed that no one could ever outwit him. Even Snape, his most trusted servant, was unaware of the Horcruxes. And when the Dark Lord began killing his own allies out of paranoia, such as Snape himself, to gain control of the Elder Wand, his empire of terror crumbled from within. His downfall came not from the strength of his enemies, but from the weakness of his own overconfidence. Harry once asked Dumbledore, was it important to make sure to verify? And Dumbledore replied, a wise man, even if he thinks a thing impossible, may still wish to confirm it. Voldemort was not wise. He was brilliant, but not wise. That was his curse. Even in the Forbidden Forest facing Harry, Voldemort still didn't know. He thought killing Harry would bring him final victory. But killing Harry only freed the part of his soul trapped inside him. The piece he never meant to create. The piece he never even noticed. When Voldemort stood in the Great Hall during the final battle, wand raised, robes billowing, and arrogance burning in his red eyes, he believed he was invincible. But Harry had destroyed every Horcrux, each one gone, because others had dared to investigate, to look, to check, and Voldemort had not. The war could have ended differently. If Voldemort had walked the same path Harry did, if he had visited the places he once touched with dark magic, he would have known. He would have fortified, adjusted, retaliated. But he did not. He never checked. And so the man who feared death more than anything became its most poetic victim. Not because he was outdueled, not because he was outnumbered, but because he was outsmarted by his own refusal to ask a single, simple question: are they still safe? This failure is what makes Voldemort's story not just one of terror and horror, but one of blind pride. In his final breath, when the elder wand flew from his hand and death finally claimed him, he must have realized. Not that Harry was the master of the wand, but that his soul had already died long before his body did, piece by piece, and he had never looked back. The most dangerous thing Voldemort ever did wasn't splitting his soul. It was forgetting to look behind him. And in that silence, in that absence of doubt, he lost everything he tried to preserve. Number 23. Magic can regrow bones, but not fix glasses. In the bustling corridors of Hogwarts, where portraits whispered secrets and staircases moved of their own accord, one thing remained oddly static: the round glasses perched on Harry Potter's nose. A boy who could face down a basilisk and resist the imperious curse was still squinting through scratched lenses. The wizarding world brimmed with magical cures and miraculous potions, yet somehow myopia seemed beyond its reach. It's a detail that sits uncomfortably within J.K. Rowling's rich world-building, raising a curious question. Why didn't Harry ever fix his eyesight? From the very beginning, his glasses became part of his iconic image. In Philosopher's Stone, Rowling introduces Harry with, he wore round glasses held together with a lot of Scotch tape because of all the times Dudley had punched him on the nose. But the glasses weren't just a symbol of his mistreatment, they stuck with him even after his arrival at Hogwarts. And not once in 7 books did Madame Pomfrey or anyone else suggest correcting his vision. This omission becomes stranger when we consider the extent of magical healing available at Hogwarts. In Chamber of Secrets, Harry breaks his arm during a Quidditch match. When Gilderoy Lockhart's spell backfires and vanishes the bones entirely, Madame Pomfrey grows them back overnight using Scalar Grow. The process was painful, yes, but effective. You will be able to go to your next match with 2 arms, she said, handing him the steaming bottle. If bones could be regrown, surely reshaping the eye's lens was within reach. There's also the remarkable case of Hermione Granger's teeth. After Draco Malfoy hexes her, causing her front teeth to grow wildly, Madame Pomfrey not only reverses the spell but even allows Hermione to shrink them a bit more than their original size. This subtle detail found in Goblet of Fire shows that cosmetic adjustments are not only possible but easy. I let her shrink my teeth a bit more, Hermione confessed to Harry, and Ron, grinning. So where was this dental-level wizardry when it came to Harry's eyes? The irony is hard to ignore. Magic is used to reverse petrification, extract venom, and remove dangerous curses, yet no one ever says, let's fix your vision, not even a passing mention. In Half-Blood Prince, Bill Weasley is attacked by Fenrir Greyback, his face torn and mauled, yet Madame Pomfrey and magical salves ease his recovery. Tonks reassures everyone, saying, he'll be okay. Madame Pomfrey says he won't look the same, but it could be worse. Again, magical healing seems nearly limitless except when it comes to the eyes of the boy who lived. It's not just a medical oversight. Even everyday spells could have helped Harry. Consider the Oculus Reparo spell Hermione uses in Philosopher's Stone to fix Harry's glasses. Oculus Reparo, she says, pointing her wand, and the cracked lenses mend instantly. If a first year can repair broken lenses without trouble, surely there's a more permanent spell to correct poor eyesight. It doesn't seem like too great a leap. We also see the use of Episky, a minor healing charm, in Half-Blood Prince when Tonks uses it to fix Harry's broken nose. Episky, she murmured, and his nose snapped back into place. If such a simple incantation can realign bones, why hasn't a variation been developed for correcting refractive errors? In a world where the Polyjuice potion can turn someone into a near-perfect replica of another person, down to their vocal cords and fingerprints, it defies belief that no one's brewed a simple potion for myopia. The Polyjuice potion, described in Chamber of Secrets, is complicated but effective. It transforms every physical aspect. Imagine its potential if applied selectively, say, to ocular tissue. But even Snape, who mastered potion-making to the point of inventing spells like Sectum Sempra, never mentioned a vision-correcting brew. Maybe the problem lies in the assumption that glasses are just part of Harry's identity, something too sacred to tamper with. But even then, the lack of in-universe curiosity is startling. Ron, who constantly complains about his broken wand and ratty robes, never once teases Harry about his glasses. Hermione, whose encyclopedic knowledge spans both magical and muggle worlds, never suggests a fix either. Are we to believe no one ever thought of it? Dumbledore's silence on the matter is particularly striking. Here's a man who understands both the symbolic and practical importance of appearance. His own half-moon spectacles are iconic. Could he have intentionally left Harry's vision unimproved, perhaps as a reminder of his human vulnerability? It's a stretch, but in Order of the Phoenix, when Dumbledore tells Harry, "I cared about you too much," we are reminded that his decisions weren't always straightforward. Maybe letting Harry keep his glasses was, in his mind, part of preserving the boy's humility. And what of the magical optometry community? Surely in a world with flying brooms, self-writing quills and extendable ears, there's a specialist offering vision-correcting charms or devices. We never hear of them, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. Flourish and Blot sells magical books. Zonko's sells prank items. Where is the wizarding equivalent of an optical shop? Even in Diagon Alley or Hogsmeade, there's no mention of such a place. It's worth noting that Harry isn't the only bespectacled wizard. Dumbledore wears glasses, as does Trelawney, though hers are more of a magnifying kind. Perhaps in wizarding culture, glasses are less about necessity and more about choice or even status. Still, Harry's glasses are constantly breaking, fogging, and getting in the way during fights. They are not ornamental, they're essential. And in a magical world, essentials are usually dealt with magically. The books are full of moments where Harry's glasses are mentioned not just as decoration, but as obstacles. In Deathly Hallows, during the escape from Privet Drive, Harry's glasses are nearly knocked off by a branch as they fly on Hagrid's motorcycle. In the chaos of battle, this could have been disastrous. And yet no one says, maybe it's time for a magical solution. Even magical creatures aren't left out when it comes to restoration. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Buckbeak is healed after being slashed by the Hippogriff executioner. In Goblet of Fire, Mad-Eye Moody's magical eye swivels independently and can see through invisibility cloaks and walls. If such technological wizardry exists, then surely something between Moody's enchanted eye and Hermione's dental work could have solved Harry's vision problems. We must also remember that Harry was at times a guinea pig for magical experimentation. In Order of the Phoenix, he's taught occlumency by Snape, suffers from dreams monitored by Dumbledore, and is even possessed by Voldemort. Yet, for all the magical interference in his life, no one ever thought to test a vision-correcting spell on him. Perhaps they didn't consider it important enough, but that leads us to wonder what, then, was important. Some fans have speculated that the glasses served a literary purpose, making Harry relatable. His spectacles were a symbol of his ordinary boy status. He wasn't a chosen one because he looked like a hero. He was one because of who he was inside. But this raises an uncomfortable contradiction. The wizarding world constantly defies physical limitations. Why draw the line at eyesight? Let's go back to the Triwizard Tournament. In Goblet of Fire, Harry is thrown into tasks that require precision and agility. In the first task, he faces a dragon and has to fly around at high speeds. During the second task, he dives into the Black Lake, wearing enchanted gillyweed to breathe underwater. Wouldn't fogged-up lenses or impaired vision be a liability? Yet the books don't suggest any magical remedy to assist him, not even temporary vision enchantments. There is, however, one curious moment in Order of the Phoenix, when Harry's glasses fall off during a duel. He ducked to avoid a jet of red light, slipped on the wet floor, and fell flat on his back, his glasses sliding off his nose. It's an instant of vulnerability, one that nearly costs him his life. Had he been blind without them, the consequences could have been fatal. Yet no adult in the room, not Lupin, not Moody, seems to care. Even the Weasley twins, known for inventing wild magical products, never thought of prank glasses that double as vision-correcting tools. They developed Peruvian instant darkness powder, skiving snack boxes, and extendable ears. Yet glasses? Nothing, not even as a joke. Perhaps the answer lies not in logic, but in narrative consistency. Harry's glasses, like his lightning scar, are visual anchors. They tell us who he is even before he speaks. They remind us he's human, fragile, a child thrown into an adult war. But in universe, their persistence makes no sense. A single visit to Madame Pomfrey, or perhaps a new shop tucked between Flourish and Blotts and Ollivanders, could have erased the need for them forever. But it never happened. And maybe that's the strangest spell of all. Not one cast with a wand, but one cast by the author. An enchantment of omission. The boy who conquered death still had to squint to read his textbooks. Perhaps, in the end, that says more about the world he lived in than all the magic put together. Number 24, Arthur Weasley's Muggle obsession makes no sense. Arthur Weasley stood in the middle of the living room, holding a pair of jumper cables like they were relics from a fallen civilization. "Now, Molly," he said with that same wide-eyed wonder that made his children roll their eyes and Hermione suppress a sigh. "These are for... Remind me, what exactly do they do again?" He turned them over in his hands like precious artifacts, completely unaware he was holding them the wrong way around. It was a classic Arthur moment, full of warmth, curiosity, and a total lack of comprehension. This was the man who once earnestly asked Harry, "What exactly is the function of a rubber duck?" Chamber of Secrets, Chapter 4. And despite his role as the head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, he had never quite figured out the answer. There's something delightfully paradoxical about Arthur Weasley. On the one hand, he loves Muggles, not in the vague, polite, tolerant way many wizards pretend to. No, Arthur adores them. He reveres their inventiveness, their perseverance, and above all, their creativity in a world without magic. And yet, for someone who has dedicated his entire adult life to Muggle artifacts, his understanding of them is astonishingly shallow. He doesn't know what a plug does. He's baffled by escalators. He enchants Muggle items with reckless abandon, remember the enchanted Ford Anglia, with no clear idea of how they actually worked before magic interfered. It's a strange contradiction, one that deserves more attention than it usually gets. Consider the moment when Arthur questions Harry about his summer. "Tell me, Harry, what exactly is the function of a rubber duck?" That question has become iconic for a reason. It captures everything charming and maddening about Arthur's approach to the Muggle world. He wants to know truly. But he asks as if the answer is buried in deep philosophy, as if Muggles might have devised some transcendent use for bath toys. The real answer, it floats in the bath and makes a squeaky noise, might disappoint him. In Goblet of Fire, when Arthur accompanies Harry to the Quidditch World Cup using a portkey, he insists on dressing like a Muggle. The result is a disaster. He wears a golfing sweater over his robes with galoshes and a wide-brimmed hat. "We're going for a stroll and don't want to attract attention," he says brightly. But of course that very outfit does attract attention. It's a recurring theme. Arthur wants so badly to belong in the Muggle world, to appreciate it, even protect it, but he never quite gets it right. He walks into telephone boxes and marvels at how ingenious Muggles are for using coins to talk to each other. Meanwhile, his teenage son Ron is more familiar with muggle snacks than his father is with muggle electricity. And yet Arthur held an incredibly important position in the Ministry of Magic. He was in charge of making sure magical people didn't misuse muggle objects. That's a serious job, especially considering how easily wizards can endanger unsuspecting muggles. Arthur once investigated a man named Willie Widdershins who had enchanted public toilets to regurgitate on muggles. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 7. Protecting muggles from magical abuse sounds like a job that requires intimate knowledge of both magical law and muggle technology. But Arthur, it seems, got by with good intentions, not expertise. His biggest project, perhaps, was the Ford Anglia. Arthur enchanted the car to fly, stretch, and become invisible. But he never seemed to consider that doing so might be a serious breach of muggle confidentiality. When Harry and Ron crash it into the Whomping Willow, Arthur is reprimanded at work. Molly scolds him with a fury only a Weasley matriarch can deliver. "Your sons flew that car to Surrey and back last night." Arthur, half proud and half terrified, replies, "Did it really? Did it work?" His excitement completely overshadows the danger involved. It's clear he's more fascinated by the technical achievement than the real-world implications. It wasn't just curiosity that made Arthur an odd fit for his job. It was ignorance. How could a man protect muggles from magical misuse when he didn't understand how those items were meant to be used? How could he know the risk of enchanting a television if he didn't grasp how a television even functioned in the first place? He might as well have been in charge of dragons without knowing what fire is. It's like assigning someone to manage the British Museum who thinks mummies are zombies. That said, his ignorance wasn't born of arrogance. Arthur never looked down on muggles the way Lucius Malfoy did. In fact, he seemed to idealize them. Where others saw muggles as powerless or inferior, Arthur saw them as brilliant survivors in a world without wands. "They found all sorts of ways to get along without magic," he once said admiringly, Chamber of Secrets, Chapter 4. And perhaps that very awe blinded him. He didn't want to study muggles the way an anthropologist studies a tribe. He wanted to marvel at them like an astronomer looking at stars. One might argue that Arthur's true strength lay not in his knowledge, but in his compassion. He may not have understood how a dishwasher worked, but he would never let someone hex a dishwasher just for laughs. He defended muggles with a sincerity that few others in the magical world could match. But even compassion has limits when it comes to regulation. When the stakes are the safety of an entire non-magical population, you'd hope the person in charge knows what AC power means. There is a moment in Order of the Phoenix when Arthur is nearly killed by Nagini while standing guard over the Hall of Prophecies. He's later taken to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies. While recovering, he tells Harry about his attempts to use muggle stitches instead of magical healing. That's what muggles do, isn't it? Sew them up? I do wonder whether it mightn't be just as effective, if not more so, to bind the wound the muggle way. Molly is horrified. But it shows that even when his life was on the line, Arthur still clung to this idea that muggles had something valuable to teach. He just never quite got around to actually learning it. And yet that moment is profoundly human. It reveals Arthur not just as a comic relief character, but as a man earnestly reaching across the boundary between two worlds. He's fascinated by things he doesn't understand. He doesn't mock what he doesn't know. In that way, he's the opposite of characters like Vernon Dursley, who hate what they fear. Arthur loves what he can't grasp, and maybe that's part of the reason readers adore him. Still, from a functional standpoint, his incompetence raises questions. If he didn't understand a plug, how could he ensure that magical plugs didn't cause fires in muggle homes? How could he determine whether a bewitched hairdryer posed a risk of exposure? Arthur's affection for the muggle world is touching, but it's not the same thing as competence. It's worth noting that Hermione Granger, a muggle-born witch, probably knew more about Muggle technology by age 11 than Arthur did in his 40s. She was the one who explained things like electricity and television to Ron. And yet Arthur never sought her out to deepen his understanding. Imagine how useful Hermione could have been to his department. Imagine the two of them collaborating on pamphlets about magical safety in Muggle environments. But Arthur didn't build systems. He tinkered, he admired, he experimented in his shed. And maybe that's part of the tragedy. Arthur Weasley had all the right instincts. He had the heart. He had the integrity. But he lacked the technical foundation. His department, as noble as its mission was, probably never had the resources or expertise to protect Muggles the way they deserved. And that reflects something larger. The magical world never truly bothered to understand Muggle society in depth. Arthur was the best they had, and he thought escalators were stairs that move. That said, his children learned from his example. Fred and George became inventors inspired by their father's playfulness with objects. Ron, though constantly bewildered by Muggle culture, never looked down on it. Ginny, practical and grounded, respected her father's curiosity even when she rolled her eyes. And Percy went in the other direction, seeking rigid structure. But even that was a reaction to Arthur's endearing chaos. Arthur's ignorance might never have endangered lives directly, but it's symbolic of a wider problem in the wizarding world. There's a gulf between Muggle and magical society, and it's filled not with bridges but with enchanted rubber ducks and flying cars. Arthur tried to build those bridges but without a blueprint, and sometimes that's not enough. The most poignant part of Arthur's story is that he never stopped being curious. Even after being attacked, even after facing ridicule from his colleagues, he continued asking questions. He continued collecting batteries, plugs, and bits of wiring. He was a man out of time, in love with a world he could never quite enter. So when we see him fiddling with a toaster or marveling at a microwave, we're not just watching comic relief. We're watching someone genuinely trying to connect. His questions might be naive, but they're always sincere. "Tell me, Harry," he asks, "what's the function of a rubber duck?" It's easy to laugh, but maybe the better question is, why didn't more wizards ask? Arthur Weasley's legacy isn't just in the enchanted car or the enchanted toilet. It's in the idea that curiosity, even clumsy curiosity, is better than fear. He may never have understood Muggles, but he wanted to. And in a world full of division, that matters more than perfection. Number 25, The Prophecy Chase and the Forgotten Summoning Charm. In the suffocating silence of the Department of Mysteries, amid whispering prophecies sealed in endless rows of glass orbs, a battle ignited, a frantic, breathless chase that would etch itself into the memory of every reader. It was there, under the ever-watchful gaze of time and magic, that a curious detail took root, something that, once noticed, simply refused to be forgotten. The prophecy orb, resting so delicately in Harry Potter's hands, so vital to Voldemort's plan, never once was summoned by magic. Not once did a Death Eater raise a wand and utter Actio prophecy. And yet, why not? The scene is vivid, pulsing with fear and urgency. Harry looked at the shelf. The small, dusty glass orb shone in the light cast by Hermione's wand. The moment the orb was touched, its importance became tangible. It contained the prophecy, a thread of fate tying Harry and Voldemort together in a knot that neither could escape. So fragile, so easy to destroy. And yet the Death Eaters needed it whole. Lucius Malfoy, Bellatrix Lestrange, and others, all seasoned, intelligent wizards, were willing to chase children through rooms of nightmares instead of simply summoning the object that held their dark master's hopes. Throughout the series, the summoning charm, Actio, is treated as one of the most versatile and straightforward spells. We've seen Harry use it effortlessly during the Triwizard Tournament to call his firebolt in a moment of desperation. We've seen Hermione summon books from high shelves, Ron pull snacks to himself, and Fred and George yank suitcases through the air. It's not a spell reserved for the elite. It's basic, elementary, first-year material. So why didn't the Death Eaters use it? When Harry first reached the prophecy, it's made clear that only those about whom a prophecy is made can retrieve it. Only those to whom it refers can safely lift it from the shelf, says Dumbledore later. But that doesn't answer the question entirely. The Death Eaters didn't know this for certain at the time. They assumed Harry could get it, and that they could take it from him. Which begs the question, why not try summoning it from the shadows as Harry reached out? Why not hide behind the shelves and whisper Accio before the boy had a chance to even touch it? Lucius Malfoy, often portrayed as cunning and calculating, had ample opportunity. He even confronts Harry with a sneer of superiority, certain of victory. "Give me the prophecy, Potter," he says, his hand outstretched, yet his wand idle. It's as if the rules of logic momentarily fell away, replaced by the demands of drama. Surely someone like Malfoy, raised in a world of manipulation and magical finesse, would have considered a simple spell. He had used worse to achieve less. Bellatrix Lestrange, perhaps less patient and more driven by madness, was no stranger to destructive magic. But even she, in her fervour, didn't resort to the most basic tool in a wizard's arsenal. Her method was brute force, dueling, threats, fire, death. Not subtlety, not thought. But wasn't that part of the failure? The Death Eaters underestimated the children, yes, but more damningly, they abandoned sense for spectacle. The prophecy room wasn't shielded from magic. There was no indication that summoning charms were disabled. If such protections existed, why wasn't it ever mentioned? Surely Hermione, with her encyclopedic knowledge, would have whispered, "You can't use Accio in here, it won't work." But she doesn't. She acts as if the rules are the same. When the group is ambushed, they run, not because magic fails, but because logic did. During the chase, as Death Eaters' raw threats and hexes echo off the stone, the prophecy is jostled in Harry's arms like an overripe fruit ready to burst. And still not once does a single adult wizard point a wand and call it. Not Bellatrix, not Rodolphus, not Rabastan. They're content to chase, to corner, to terrify, but they do not summon. As readers, we're expected to ride the wave of chaos and not ask why, but the question lingers, louder with every reread. Sirius Black dies in that place, a cousin kills a cousin, and all the while the orb is never touched by magic. The tragedy of it deepens when you realize how avoidable it might have been. A single spell, a single moment of thought could have changed the tide. Instead, we're left with heartbreak and an uncomfortable question about logic and storytelling. J.K. Rowling crafted a world so intricately layered that such inconsistencies burn brighter. In the battle at the Ministry, the tension is masterfully executed, but it's a magician's sleight of hand. Keep the reader dazzled, and they won't see the strings. And yet, Accio prophecy was never even attempted. Why? Maybe it's because, in that moment, logic was sacrificed for narrative suspense. Rowling needed the children to run. She needed them to be afraid. She needed Sirius to fall. She needed the prophecy to break, shattering not just the orb, but Voldemort's plan too. But she didn't want the prophecy to be snatched out of the air with one word. That wouldn't be cinematic. That wouldn't bleed. But still, the contradiction stings. These were not inexperienced villains. They were Voldemort's elite. They were survivors of Azkaban. They were skilled in every dark art imaginable, and yet they failed to apply first-year spell work to the most important object in the room. Perhaps Rowling thought that by introducing the only those mentioned can touch the prophecy rule, That would be enough to excuse the lapse. But the rule doesn't prevent the attempt, it only punishes the ignorant, and the Death Eaters were not ignorant, were. In the end, it is Neville Longbottom who stumbles, the prophecy orb slips. It shattered on the floor beside them, and the record within it was lost forever. A single heartbeat, a single misstep, and it was gone. And with it, a moment of truth that would have rewritten everything. The irony is sharp. Despite all their power, all their menace, the Death Eaters couldn't protect what they came for, and they never tried the simplest method. It's not the only time in the series that Accio becomes a ghost in the room. In The Half-Blood Prince, Harry wonders why Dumbledore doesn't summon a Horcrux from its hiding place. In The Deathly Hallows, the trio often forgets they could summon food or objects unless the plot requires hardship. But in the Department of Mysteries, the omission is loudest. Some fans defend the scene, saying that protections were implied, that the room must have had enchantments. But magic in Rowling's world has rules, and those rules are usually explained. When magic fails, it fails publicly, like when the trace is broken or when spells backfire. But in this case, silence hangs like a shroud. The most basic charm in the book is simply ignored. And yet maybe this says more about the Death Eaters than we first thought. Maybe their downfall wasn't just their cruelty or arrogance, but their blindness to the simple. Maybe Voldemort gathered warriors who had forgotten how to think. Maybe the spell wasn't used because they never saw it. In their eyes, magic was a weapon, not a tool. Power, not precision. But even that interpretation is thin. It stretches to excuse something that should have been addressed. If Lucius Malfoy had tried Accio and failed, if the orb had trembled but stayed rooted, then the audience would have nodded. Protection confirmed. Plot justified. But to leave it unspoken, that's not clever, that's careless. "Give me the prophecy, Potter," Lucius says again, commanding and desperate. He could have whispered the charm, he could have caught it mid-air, he could have ended the chase before it began. But he didn't, and that silence screams louder than any spell. In the chaos of the fight, spells fly and bodies fall, and through it all, the prophecy becomes a relic not just of destiny but of a mission. Its destruction feels inevitable, but only because the plot demands it, not because logic does. And as readers, we feel the friction. We're asked to suspend disbelief one spell too far. In the grand narrative, the battle of the Department of Mysteries is unforgettable. It gives us heroism and death, fear and fire. It advances the prophecy, shatters illusions, and costs Harry something he can never regain. But buried within it is a question that cracks the foundation. Why didn't they summon it? In fiction, the most dangerous enemy is not a dark wizard. It's the unanswered question. And this one, this silent, shimmering orb, asks it with every reread. Number 26. Hogwarts ghosts know everything, but say nothing. The ghosts of Hogwarts glide silently through its ancient corridors, slipping through walls and drifting past students with expressions that betray neither joy nor sorrow. But beneath their translucent surfaces lies knowledge deeper than the school's foundations. For centuries they have watched, listened and remembered, and yet when the castle was in danger, when students were being attacked, they said nothing. Nearly headless Nick, with his comically tragic decapitation and affable demeanour, often seemed like a harmless fixture of the castle, more decoration than protector. But that assumption crumbles under scrutiny. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Nick admits to having died in 1492. That places him in Hogwarts for over 500 years, 5 centuries of watching Slytherins whisper and vanish, of seeing teachers come and go, of hearing secrets echo off the cold stone walls. He would have witnessed patterns. He would have overheard the murmurs of dark students exploring forbidden chambers. Could he really not have known about the Chamber of Secrets? And yet, when Hermione lay petrified and fear gripped the hearts of students, Nick offered no help. No direction, not even a hint. His silence was nearly as deafening as the basilisk's deadly hiss. When asked about the chamber, most staff brushed it off as legend, but the ghosts, eternal observers, they should have known better. I always knew Salazar Slytherin was a bit of a rogue, Nick says in the second book. That alone suggests a familiarity with the man's legacy. So why didn't he, or the Bloody Baron for that matter, Slytherin's own house ghost, speak up? The Bloody Baron is perhaps the most suspect of them all. Cloaked in blood-stained robes and speaking in near silence, he's known for terrifying students and even commanding the respect of Peeves. He was once a student of the castle, a member of Slytherin House, and later a murderer. He is bound to the castle not only by death but by guilt. If anyone were to understand the darker passages of the Slytherin legacy, it would be him. He knew Salazar's descendants. He saw the way the house bred secrets, and yet, like Nick, he too watched the events unfold without uttering a word. What makes this all the more eerie is how vividly the ghosts perceive the castle's magic. They can hear sounds from rooms others cannot. They float through stone as if it were mist. The Fat Friar, Hufflepuff's portly ghost, has been described as unusually cheerful and forgiving. But even he, usually so quick to assist students, offered no insight into what was petrifying Muggle-borns. Why? It is not out of ignorance. Ho, these ghosts know things they have always known, but for some reason they do not tell. Consider how easy it was for moaning Myrtle to describe the entrance to the chamber. Once she was asked, "There's a sink in the girls' bathroom on the second floor with a snake on the tap," she said. "I saw a pair of big yellow eyes. And then I died." The knowledge had always been there, floating inside the ghost of a teenage girl, trapped in a bathroom for decades, and yet no professor ever thought to question her. None of the ghosts pointed Harry toward her either. Myrtle might have been moaning, but no one had truly listened, not even the other ghosts. Why such silence? It is almost as if a code exists among the dead, a silent agreement to watch but never intervene. They float through the tragedies of the living like forgotten sentinels, unwilling to alter fate. Even when it comes to life-threatening danger, their voices remain muffled by time. The Grey Lady, ghost of Ravenclaw Tower, is another telling example. It takes Harry until Deathly Hallows to discover that she is in fact Helena Ravenclaw, daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw, and that she had hidden her mother's diadem, a Horcrux no less. For centuries she knew of its location, she knew of Voldemort's corruption of it, and still she remained quiet until Harry, in a moment of clarity and desperation, confronted her. "You are the Grey Lady?" he asked. "The ghost of Ravenclaw Tower?" Only then did she reveal her story. But why hadn't she warned anyone before? Was it pride, shame, or something darker? These ghosts are not mere echoes. They speak, they think, they remember, they laugh and cry and sulk. Peeves, a poltergeist rather than a true ghost, is chaotic and wild, but he too seems to know far more than he lets on. He often sings songs that border on prophetic, dances through corridors at the perfect moment, and taunts students with eerily accurate insults. His loyalty to the Bloody Baron implies a hierarchy among spirits, one where silence might be enforced rather than chosen. Even Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, rarely consults the castle's ghosts on serious matters. One would think, with centuries of accumulated knowledge, they'd be an invaluable source of insight, but they are kept at arm's length, respected but not relied upon. Why? What have they seen that makes them so reluctant to interfere? In truth, Hogwarts itself may be part of the reason. The castle is ancient, alive with enchantments and layered with secrets. It may demand discretion from its spectral inhabitants. Maybe the ghosts are not permitted to reveal certain truths. Or maybe they fear the repercussions of speaking out. Who knows what oaths bind the dead to silence? There's also the matter of the ghosts' personalities. Nick, for instance, is desperate to gain acceptance into the Headless Hunt, a group that has nothing to do with Hogwarts. He's preoccupied with his reputation even in death. Perhaps this self-obsession blinds him to the suffering around him. The Grey Lady is bitter, angry, wounded by betrayal. The Bloody Baron is locked in a silent penance. They are haunted as much by their own pasts as the students they observe. But what truly chills the heart is the thought that maybe they choose not to help, that they see pain and fear and think, this is not our story. When Ginny Weasley was being possessed by the memory of Tom Riddle, when spiders fled the halls and petrified students were carried to the hospital wing, none of the ghosts said, we know what this is. No one said, follow the pipes.
No one said, ask Myrtle.
It was left to 12-year-old children to unravel a centuries-old mystery, to face a monster born from prejudice and fear. Dumbledore was removed, McGonagall was overwhelmed, but the ghosts, they were still there, watching, floating, knowing. When the trio finally solved the riddle and defeated the basilisk, there were no apologies from the ghosts, no acknowledgements that they could have helped. Life at Hogwarts simply returned to normal. Myrtle retreated to her toilet. Nick resumed his awkward gliding through the halls. The Bloody Baron returned to the shadows, and no one dared ask, why didn't you speak? Later, when Harry learns about the Horcruxes, he once again turns to the Grey Lady. It's a desperate moment. Time is running out, and only then does she offer her secret. I stole the diadem, she says bitterly. I sought to make myself cleverer, more important than my mother. I ran away with it. The pain in her voice is real, but so is the guilt. And once again, the truth had been there all along, hidden in a ghost's silence. Could Voldemort have been stopped earlier if someone had asked the right questions? Could the chamber have been reopened if the Bloody Baron had simply warned Dumbledore? Could the story have changed if the ghosts had broken their vow of silence? We may never know, but what we do know is that Hogwarts ghosts are not powerless. They're not mere echoes of the past. They are witnesses to every dark corner, every whispered plot, every unspoken curse etched into the walls of that ancient school. And yet again and again they choose silence. There is a line in Deathly Hallows that strikes deeply. The castle grounds were silent. The ghosts glided like wisps of mist through the corridors. It's poetic, but in that silence lies a truth. Hogwarts ghosts are both guardians and prisoners of knowledge. They float above the living, tethered to stories they dare not tell. What else do they know? What else are they hiding? And if the dead are silent, who will speak for the truth? Number 27, James and Lily's missing friends. When James and Lily Potter were murdered on that infamous Halloween night in 1981, the world of wizardry trembled. The Dark Lord had fallen, the war had seemingly ended, and a child, barely over a year old, had lived through the impossible. But while Harry Potter became the boy who lived, he also became the boy who was left behind, left not in the embrace of love or the arms of friends and allies, but on the doorstep of the Dursleys, whose disdain for magic was only surpassed by their disdain for Harry himself. And the question that continues to haunt those who know his story is this: where were James and Lily's friends? Sirius Black, James's closest friend, was the first to act. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, he tells Harry, I would have died before I betrayed your parents." He had gone to Godric's Hollow that night, too late to save them but not too late to mourn. He was devastated. He gave Hagrid his flying motorcycle and went after Peter Pettigrew, whom he believed had betrayed the Potters. But then Sirius vanished from the narrative for 12 years, imprisoned in Azkaban, blamed for the very deaths he tried to avenge. Harry's only godfather was locked away, presumed guilty. He couldn't look after the child he swore to protect. Remus Lupin, another of James and Lily's closest friends, was nowhere near Godric's Hollow that night. In fact, he tells Harry much later that he wasn't even told of the Fidelius charm the Potters used. I thought it was Sirius who had betrayed them. I thought I was the last of us. Dumbledore himself admits, "It was a mistake to leave you with the Dursleys." And yet he allowed it. Lupin, outcast by his condition as a werewolf, may have assumed he had no right to interfere. But would that have stopped him? The question lingers. There's a chilling silence in the aftermath of James and Lily's deaths. The Order of the Phoenix, a vibrant, passionate resistance group, disappears from Harry's early life. Members like Emmeline Vance, Daedalus Diggle, Hestia Jones, and even Alastor Moody, who was active in the original war, never approached the boy until years later. Diggle is seen bowing to Harry in a shop, but there is no mention of visits, letters, or guardianship offers. These were people who had fought alongside Harry's parents. Where were they? It is perhaps the greatest mystery of Harry's early life, not the magic, not Voldemort's survival, but the deafening absence of those who should have protected him. Sirius had an excuse. Lupin had his demons. Pettigrew was in hiding, but what about Marlene McKinnon, one of the bravest witches in the Order, the Prewets, Benji Fenwick, Dorcas Meadows, who Voldemort killed personally? Surely she had no chance to help. But some survived. Why did none of them demand to see Harry? Even Molly and Arthur Weasley, known for their warm hearts and enormous compassion, didn't seem to take notice of the boy in Surrey. It's not until the summer before Harry's second year that they invite him into their home. Molly, who knew Lily, who fought in the same war, why didn't she intervene earlier? Did they even know where he was? Or did Dumbledore truly cloak Harry's location in such secrecy that even allies were kept at bay? Dumbledore is the linchpin of this entire story. In the Philosopher's Stone, he tells McGonagall it's the best place for him. But was it really? Was the cupboard under the stairs the destiny meant for the son of two war heroes? He trusted Petunia Dursley with a child she loathed simply because of blood magic and a letter. That decision, cloaked in ancient protection spells, may have shielded Harry from Voldemort's followers, but it also shielded him from love. McGonagall herself saw the Dursleys. She sat on their wall, transformed as a cat, for an entire day. She told Dumbledore, "These people will never understand him," but even she did not return for a visit, not once in 10 years. Surely the deputy headmistress of Hogwarts, a woman who cared deeply for her students, could have checked in, could have sent a gift, a letter, something. But Harry grew up thinking his parents had no friends left alive. The truth is that many in the Order were dead. The First Wizarding War took a terrible toll, but others were simply silent. Elphias Doge, who would later write Lily and James's obituary, claimed to have been a lifelong friend. He was even part of the Slug Club with them. But there's no mention of him reaching out to Harry before his 5th year. What was stopping him? Fear, orders, or something else? Dumbledore's decision may have been grounded in protection, but it was also steeped in isolation. The more Harry suffered, the more humble he became. Perhaps that was the point. A child raised in love might have grown arrogant, too confident, too willing to challenge fate. A child raised in cruelty, however, would never question the authority of those who showed him kindness, even if they lied, even if they sent him into danger. Was this part of Dumbledore's grand design? When Harry first arrives at Hogwarts, the name Potter is met with awe, but not recognition. No student seems to know much about him. No adult rushes to greet him like a long-lost son. The staff is polite, some curious, but no one runs to embrace him. No one says, "You look just like your father." Not until Sirius writes that line in a letter, not until Lupin says it years later. Why did they all wait so long? Harry's childhood was filled with doubt, neglect, and loneliness. He wore Dudley's old clothes. He believed magic was a dream until Hagrid knocked down the door. Would James and Lily have wanted this? Would they have allowed it? Had they lived? And if their friends had known, even suspected, what was happening behind those closed doors in Privet Drive, would they have stayed away? Let us not forget Arabella Figg, the neighbour Dumbledore planted nearby. A squib, loyal to the cause, she kept watch over Harry for years, but she too never revealed herself. She offered no friendship, no kindness, no warmth. In Order of the Phoenix, she tells Harry, Dumbledore told me not to say anything. And so she didn't. Even as he limped home with bruises, even as he wandered the streets alone. She saw it all and said nothing. It's hard not to feel a sense of betrayal. Harry was a child of war heroes, a child of prophecy, and yet no letters arrived on his birthdays, no visitors came through the chimney, no friendly face appeared at the gate. The wizarding world celebrated him, whispered his name in reverence, but offered no comfort, no cake, no arms to hold him through the nightmares. When Sirius finally re-enters Harry's life, the boy clings to the idea of family like a drowning man to driftwood. "You'd have stayed with me if you could?" he asks, eyes wide. Sirius replies, "Of course I would." And the tragedy lies not in the truth, but in the timing. Sirius had 12 years stolen from him. 12 years when Harry needed him most. 12 years that could have changed everything. Lupin, when he returns to teach at Hogwarts, is gentle and kind. He becomes a mentor to Harry, but even then he hesitates. He keeps his distance. When asked why he didn't reach out sooner, he says, "I thought you had enough to worry about." And perhaps he did, but one wonders how different Harry's life would have been if Lupin had sent a single letter. Just one. Even the Ministry of Magic, so invested in Harry's existence later in life, ignored him for a decade. Cornelius Fudge never bothered to check in on the boy who defeated Voldemort. There was no Guardian review, no magical social services, just a boy growing up behind locked doors, being told he was a freak. The silence was so complete, the absence so total, that Harry grew up believing he was utterly alone. No one cared, he once told Ron, and Ron, bless him, believed it too. Because until Hogwarts, Harry didn't even know what caring looked like. Not from adults, not from authority, not from the world that called him a saviour. In the end, it was not the friends of James and Lily who saved Harry. It was not the Order or the Ministry or the wise old men with plans. It was friendship, loyalty, a red-haired boy on a train, a girl with too many books, a game of wizard chess and a troll in the dungeon. Harry learned love not from those who owed it to him, but from those who chose to give it freely. Still the question remains. Why did no one come for him? Why did James and Lily's friends vanish from his life when he needed them most? Some say it was Dumbledore's doing, others say it was fear, or chaos, or grief. But whatever the reason, Harry grew up in the shadows of greatness, starved of love, clinging to the memory of two people he never truly knew. And perhaps that is the final legacy of James and Lily Potter, not their heroism, not their sacrifice, but the mystery of absence. the echoing silence of a world that fought for their lives, then forgot the life they left behind. Number 28, memory charms. The scariest magic no one regulates. Certainly. Here's the 2,000-word artistic narrative-style text divided into 20 detailed and engaging paragraphs discussing the issue of memory spells, especially Obliviate, in the wizarding world of Harry Potter, with specific examples, quotes, and a compelling structure. When Gilderoy Lockhart raised his wand and shouted, "Obliviate!" in the dim chamber under Hogwarts, he wasn't just casting a spell, he was attempting to erase a life. The irony, of course, is that it backfired, and he erased his own. But what makes this moment truly terrifying isn't the spell's effect on Lockhart. It's the casual way he tried to destroy the memories of two 12-year-olds without a second thought. A flick of the wrist, a flash of light, and years of experiences could vanish. In the wizarding world, memory is more fragile than parchment, and Obliviate is a blade too sharp for comfort. Lockhart had made a career out of memory theft. In Chamber of Secrets, he boasted to Harry and Ron, "I'll just have to modify your memories so you forget all about it." Before that, he had been stealing the achievements of real witches and wizards by interviewing them, learning their stories, and then erasing their recollection of ever meeting him. Old ladies in the Alps, brave adventurers in Africa, none of them remembered their own heroic deeds. Lockhart erased not just memories but identity. He weaponized Obliviate, and he wasn't even especially powerful. That's the real horror. Any witch or wizard with a wand can do the same. The Ministry of Magic, the supposed guardian of order and justice, appears disturbingly lax when it comes to memory charms. While Avada Kedavra and Imperius are listed as unforgivable curses, Obliviate exists in a murky legal grey zone. Yet a poorly cast memory charm can fracture a mind irreparably, as seen with Bertha Jorkins. In Goblet of Fire, Dumbledore tells Harry, her memory was modified by a powerful memory charm that broke through layers of deception. What the charm didn't destroy, Voldemort did, but it all began with someone choosing to bury the truth instead of confronting it. Why is there such an uneven approach to magical ethics? Consider Barty Crouch Sr., a high-ranking official in the ministry who used Obliviate on his own wife, house elf, and anyone else necessary to preserve his reputation. The result? His son, a Death Eater, escaped justice and returned under a new identity. The spell didn't solve anything. It buried problems that later exploded in violence. Magic that alters memory becomes a tool not of justice, but of convenience. It's particularly unsettling how quickly even good-natured wizards resort to Obliviate. When Hermione Granger uses it on her own parents in Deathly Hallows, she says, "I've also modified my parents' memories so that they're convinced they're really called Wendell and Monica Wilkins and that their life's ambition is to move to Australia." Her voice shakes as she tells Harry and Ron. She does it out of love, to protect them from Death Eaters. But still, she erases not just their memories of her, but their entire reality. Love, fear, and logic drove her to do it, and that's what makes it terrifying. Even heroes justify it. In the chaos of war, Obliviate becomes almost commonplace. The trio uses it several times in Deathly Hallows while fleeing Death Eaters. A muggle cafe worker gets her mind wiped after a duel. Snatchers, undercover wizards, even the ministry itself. Obliviate becomes a tool of silence, a curtain behind which anything can happen. Who's to say how many lives were rewritten in those dark years? Who remembers the truth and who only remembers the spell? The spell's convenience is its danger. Imagine if such power existed in our world, the ability to rewrite any interaction, delete any mistake, or silence any witness. Would crimes even be noticed if no one remembered them? Would guilt exist if memories vanished? The wizarding world tiptoes on the edge of this abyss daily, and yet it marches forward without addressing the threat. Even Arthur Weasley, a kind-hearted and rule-following man, once said in Order of the Phoenix, "It's very hard to convict anyone if you can't produce reliable memories. Memories are not just personal, they are judicial evidence. They are the foundation of identity, law, and society. To tamper with them is to tamper with truth itself." But the wizarding world seems to shrug at that risk. Take the memory charm squad at the Ministry, known as the Obliviators. Their job is to erase the memories of muggles who witness magic. That's understandable in the spirit of secrecy, but how often are they monitored? Who ensures they don't go too far? In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Aunt Marge inflates like a balloon, the Ministry doesn't even bother contacting the Dursleys. They simply erase her memory. It's quick, clean, erased. A human being's trauma wiped out like a chalkboard. What's more, Obliviate isn't even restricted to government use. Lockhart had it, Hermione used it. No certification, no legal process, just knowledge and intent. That's all it takes to erase a mind. Imagine giving every citizen the power to remove someone else's memories and then trusting they'll never abuse it. That's the reality of the wizarding world. The ethics of memory modification are rarely discussed in Hogwarts. Students learn about the spell, they read theory, and maybe they try a safe version in class. But no one tells them this can ruin lives, this can erase trauma or create it. In a world where even children wield wands, the moral weight of memory seems curiously light. Consider Neville Longbottom's parents. Tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange, they live in St. Mungo's without knowing their own son. Their minds are shattered. But what if someone had used Obliviate instead of Cruciatus? Would the outcome be less tragic? Is it better to remember pain or to forget it? Who gets to decide that? Even Dumbledore, wise and weary, played with memory. He extracted his thoughts with a wand and dropped them into the pensieve, locking memories away like books on a shelf. He said in Half-Blood Prince, "I sometimes find, and I am sure you know the feeling, that I simply have too many thoughts and memories crammed into my mind.